Living in Virginia, you're in the fast lane on the information superhighway. We've invested $3 billion in Virginia's broadband network to give you one of the fastest internet connection speeds in the world, so you can build relationships, bring new business to our state, and meet the future of education. It's amazing what we can do together. Visit VCTA.com to learn how broadband connects the Commonwealth.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Comcast, connecting Virginians to their government. We're honored to have the chairman of the House Education Committee, Steve Landis, with us today. Good morning, sir.
Woody, good to be with you again.
Gosh, how busy is it?
Well, with crossover this week and next week, it's been very, very busy, and it's crunch time, as I like to say. Lots of meetings, subcommittees, full committee meetings, and then we have to have all of our work done this week. Committees have to finalize all their work, and then we get to see all that legislation on the floor of the House.
So all of those bills have to pass the House by, I think it's February 5th to get to the Senate.
It is. That's the deadline we're shooting for, and we still have a lot of work to do, so that's why early mornings, late nights.
Well, thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
Sure.
Virginia loves teachers. I know there's been an effort to create a special license plate, and I know Delegate McGuire was pursuing that. Do you know how that's going? He had to get a certain number of subscribers, so to speak, in order to complete the task.
I know a lot of us have been trying to promote that, and he has to get 450 individuals to sign up for that license plate. So if folks are interested in that, they can contact him. But I think he's making progress, but he's got to have that done before crossover as well, because if he doesn't get the 450, then that legislation wouldn't be able to move forward.
Wow, teacher raises are going to occur, I take it, given the governor's proposal and also the General Assembly's agreement with that.
Well, I know the House of Delegates budget will include, and thanks to Chairman Chris Jones, we're going to have the 5% included in the House budget, and that's something I'm very grateful for. I think members of the House and the House Appropriations Committee have always been supportive of additional money for teacher salaries. I think since 2013 we've put about $1 billion towards that and trying to bring our teachers' pay up to compete not only in Virginia and make sure there's more equitable distribution, if you will, and competitive areas for the state, but also with our other friends and neighbors across the country.
That's a lot of money. We're still playing catch up, as I understand it, as a result of the Great Recession.
We are, and that's been the tough thing, is just building back to those levels of funding. We were doing very well before the Great Recession, 2008, 2009, and now we're trying to get back to the level where we were, especially if you count in inflation and how that impacts, obviously, people's take-home pay and the like. So we're trying to get back to that point.
What about support staff for teachers, nurses, counselors, people of that nature?
One of the things the House Appropriations Committee is also looking at additional compensation for state employees in those other areas and other local employees, support staff, and education as well. So we're looking at seeing what we can do there as well.
And the teacher-to-pupil ratio is another big issue, isn't it?
It is. Most teachers will tell you that if you have a smaller classroom, you can spend more time with the students. You have more one-on-one time with them, and that's important. So that's something that we're trying to support. But the standards of quality and standards of accreditation set out that classrooms should not be too large, so that we can't allow teachers to actually teach students.
And I understand to some extent counselors were being taken away from their appointed tasks because they had other administrative duties. I know there's some legislation dealing with that.
As part of the Select Committee on School Safety that I was honored to serve on, I chaired the subcommittee dealing with student behavior and intervention. That was our #1 recommendation, is to change that ratio, and I actually carried House Bill 1729 that's passed the House. It's in the Senate now. That would set the ratio of 80% of the time school counselors spend is with students or groups of students, and then 20% can be doing administrative duties or other things they need to do. But we think that's an important measure, and we'll get them back to actually counseling and working with students, especially those that are having emotional or behavioral issues, because we found that if you can get that assistance early on, and then they can work with mental health professionals in the community, making sure the student gets the services they need, we can stave off some of these situations where a student acts out violently against themselves and suicide or against others.
Now, what about nurses? I understand that there's some schools that don't have nurses available.
That's something we've looked at over the last couple years, and trying to get a nurse in every school, or at least in that ballpark, and that's something that is important. But again, it all takes funding, and we have to try to prioritize and try to do the best we can. The standards of quality set out, obviously, the staffing ratios for both teachers and the class size, and also for support personnel like nurses.
And what about the standards of learning? Has there been a continued reduction in the number of tests administered?
We have moved from 22 to 17 tests now. I'm actually carrying a piece of legislation that would restore one of the standards, and that is for Virginia history and U.S. history. One of the things we found when we rolled back the standards of learning tests is that our young people probably need to be tested on Virginia and U.S. history. We're finding that many of them, upon graduation, when they get into college or get out in the work world, don't necessarily have the basics that they need to be good citizens or to go on to college. So we're looking at reinstituting that, but that would be a limited, obviously, restoration for graduation. And I think the rollback was the right thing to do with our profile of a graduate, the new high school redesign, allowing more time for students to experience other opportunities for internships or mentorships, dual enrollment programs, advanced placement courses, and the like.
What about higher education? How are we doing in terms of tuition? I know that keeps growing as well.
One of the things that the House in particular, I know the Senate's been supportive of, is to mitigate any tuition increases. The best way to do that is provide additional resources to colleges and universities. But we also need to make sure that they're being efficient and cost effective in the services, the classes, staffing, and the like that they're providing in their institutions. So that's the best way the General Assembly can do that. We also are looking at measures, Woody, that would provide more transparency so that parents and students know what boards of visitors are considering when they're looking at tuition increases. I have a bill that looks at doing more with that so that they would have to provide that information before they make a vote, and also have public comment. I know Delegate Mayeris and I have been working on that for a number of years, and that's something that's important. So that helps all in the process.
What about threat assessments? I know that was part of the school safety study.
It is, and one of the things that we've actually done a pretty good job in Virginia, we started having threat assessments and threat assessment teams in our local school systems to provide and make sure that we're working on security in each school, partnering with our local law enforcement officials and others that need to be involved in that process, first responders and the like. But threat assessment teams really are key to look at problems that occur in schools where students are indicating there's going to be a problem, and making sure that that information gets to law enforcement or the proper authorities in the school system. And what we've tried to do is try to expand that, make sure there's training for school systems, and more importantly, that they're reporting that the threat assessment teams are meeting, working on things, and updating their policies.
I've heard that one of the more effective ways to mitigate school violence, especially in terms of these Parkland shootings, is to make sure that the school is locked, that the only way to enter is by way of some personnel that allows you to enter in the first instance.
Many of our schools, what we've tried to do is provide a grant program for school construction for security purposes, and there's a grant that you'll probably see additional dollars in the House budget, and hopefully the Senate will follow as well. The key with that is trying to renovate older schools and then also work at looking at the designs for new schools so that we've got secure vestibules, we've making sure that doors are locked and that the individuals can't just come into schools that are not supposed to be there. Most of the school systems and the grants we provided are looking at also retrofitting, if you will, making sure we can put film over glass in case somebody tries to break into the school or would try to shoot their way into the school. We're looking at those kinds of things. But again, it's going to be a partnership between the state and the local governments and moving forward. But I think we've got some good recommendations related to that going forward, and again, providing additional funding for that as well, because the most important thing we can do is make sure that kids feel safe and that are safe in our schools, along with the faculty and staff that work there.
And of course, that's another very expensive proposition, and one of your colleagues on the Senate side has raised the issue about just school construction and maintenance being in the $80 billion range.
It is, and I know Senator Stanley has been an advocate of addressing that issue, and I support his efforts to try to do so. The problem that we have is schools are local buildings. The state doesn't own them. So we've got to balance our responsibility with the local government's responsibility. But I think there are things that the state can do to try to provide renovation dollars and construction dollars. But at the same time, Woody, I think we have to realize that school systems don't need to spend $70 million or $80 million on a new school. We need to be realistic, and we need to build in, if you will, some realism on design and construction and make them functional. The most important thing for a school is what happens inside, not how it looks on the outside. And so we really need to, I think, start looking at making these school buildings, new buildings especially, more functional, secure, and taking into consideration that you don't need to have a lot of glass and things, at least around the entrances or where people are coming in, and be more realistic. But again, spend more money on the inside related to technology and how we're going to structure the classrooms and flexible spaces for students to work.
Let's take a look at your district for a moment, Augusta County, Staunton. There's been a lot of development in the Staunton area over the last 10 to 15 years. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Staunton and Augusta County and actually Waynesboro as well has grown exponentially, but it's been good steady growth. We haven't seen the growth like they see in Northern Virginia or Hampton Roads or even here in Richmond, which is a good thing because we have a good steady growing economy, a good agriculture base, a lot of small businesses, a lot of high-tech businesses that are in the valley. That's bolstered by the great community college that we have, Blue Ridge Community College, and then across the mountain in the area that I represent, Piedmont, Virginia Community College. And then UVA, obviously JMU, Bridgewater College, Mary Baldwin, Eastern Mennonite, all of them play a role in our local economy. So we're very fortunate, but it's a diverse economy, and that's what we want to continue to see grow.
And of course, as a result of growth up and down Interstate 81, there's a recognized need for improvement on that thoroughfare.
There is, and I've got legislation along with Senator Openchain that started out with a process of trying to fund improvements to the corridor, about $2.2 billion, and coming up with a funding source that would allow for bonds to be issued, AAA rated bonds that would give us a good interest rate through a tolling mechanism. There seems to be some concern about tolls, and I understand that. None of us like to have to pay more, but the fact is the federal government has not provided the funds. We do not have the funds at the state level based on the decline of the gas tax that we're collecting at this point.
Now, what is the reason for that decline?
Part of the reason is fuel efficiency. As you look at even trucks, cars, we're just getting better gas mileage. So that's one of the reasons. We're looking at hybrid vehicles that obviously have better battery systems, that are looking at not operating all the time by gas combustion engines. We're looking at alternative powered vehicles, whether it's natural gas or other compressed natural gas or the like, electric vehicles. So that's all making, and we're seeing nationwide and in Virginia, a decline in the gas tax collection because people just aren't buying as much gas. So that's a concern. But we're going to come up with something, and at least I think this session will start the process. Whether we agree on a funding source, the time will tell as we go through the session, but we've got to do something and we've got to move forward. And the legislation I have Center Open Chain has, in addition to funding, looks at working with the Commonwealth Transportation Board, creating a Interstate 81 committee that has legislators and local elected officials on it that can monitor and work with them on identifying the projects and making sure they move forward, but more importantly to get public input. And then we have an Interstate 81 improvement program that's basically what the department has laid out there, but we need to update that and monitor that and look at other means to make the corridor safer, not just road construction, but how do we get vehicles off the road? How do we make sure alternative routes are available when there is a problem on the roadway, an accident that's backing people up 5 or 10 miles? So all that's part of the solution.
Is the problem primarily volume, especially in terms of commercial traffic by way of trucking?
It is. It's volume and the fact that 81 is kind of the corridor through the state for transporting goods and services and for tourism. So many people, both cars and trucks, come through the state. And one of the things about the funding source, it needs to be something that we actually get the people who are using the road to pay for it, not just those of us that live in the corridor. And so we're really struggling with how to balance that and coming up with a system that will provide the funding. But it is congested when we have accidents, and it's just because the roadway was built for less traffic, obviously. And there are other things that we can do to try to get trucks and cars off the road, but they're using it, and we need to make sure to make improvements that they're paying their fair share.
I've heard that in some other countries, trucks are transported by rail for a portion of their trip. Is that something that anyone is looking at all? We've
looked at that in the past, and I'm supportive of looking at that in the future. The issue is how long it takes rail to move goods and services. A lot of the trucks that are on Interstate 81 are transporting goods that need to be there overnight or within 2 days. With rail, generally you've got to have a longer period of time looking at transporting things, because trains just take a little bit longer. But that is something that we should look at and should support. I know Norfolk Southern is supportive of moving more trucks to their rail cars, and they're already doing that. I see them going through the valley in the areas that I represent all the time, double stacks, and that's something that they're going from our area down to the port, and we need to encourage that.
Yeah, I was going to ask that as the next question. How important is that to the Port of Virginia?
It is, and we've got the inland port in Front Royal, so obviously you see a lot of truck traffic going to that area, loading, and then those trains go to the port. And then we need to find ways to move just more truck traffic to the rail that is going through the state as well. And that's what we're really working on, and I think Norfolk Southern is supportive of that.
So I take it the trucking industry would not be supportive of a toll, and also to some extent, if you implemented rail, it would tend to hurt some retail establishments along I-81, I assume.
Well, there's always a mix. Obviously, they do benefit from the truck traffic when people stop to get gas, stop to get something to eat or spend the night, whether they're in an automobile or a truck. But the fact is, they need to, again, contribute towards the cost of the road and the road construction. The Trucking Association, Virginia Trucking Association, the Manufacturers Association have not been supportive of tolls. Those of us that want to try to get something done basically say, what's your alternative? So far, they keep coming back to the gas tax. The estimate for a gas tax to replace the toll to cover that $2.2 million would be 18 cents a gallon.
18 cents?
18 cents
just for
a gallon.
That alone.
So want to get the word out to the public that that's a possibility, but those of us that live in the corridor and they're traveling through the corridor would be paying 18 cents a gallon more than they're paying now. Now, some people say, you wouldn't see that. Well, I think people would notice that, and it could be even more based on that fact. The problem with the gas tax, too, is it's something with tolls. The General Assembly can't come back and tamper with that. Tolls have to be used for the road improvement for the facility. With gas tax, in the future, the General Assembly could come back and say, hey, we want to take a part of that or all of that. So it's not as secure. Plus, we don't get the AAA bond rating. The gas tax is not looked at as a sustainable funding source because of the decline and the fact we probably have to, even at 18 or 20 cents a gallon, we probably have to come back, the estimate is by 2027, and probably increase it more just to cover the costs for the projects.
What about relief for those who actually work in the corridor, live there? I've heard there's a proposal for a pass, an annual pass.
There is. Many people in Hampton Roads in Northern Virginia know about the Easy Pass, or having a pass that basically is a transponder that basically charges for whatever toll or whatever you're paying when you go through those. The same would work for folks in Virginia or those traveling in Virginia that wanted to get a pass. It'd be about $25 or $30. Over the 30-year period, that would only be $900 if you are like me and you have to use the interstate. So we have that built into the bill. That seems to be something that people would support. But again, some people don't want to pay anything. And the problem is we can not pay anything and just not get anything done. But I think the pressure is to try to get something done and to come up with a funding source, just like they did in Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads.
I understand, however, that some of your colleagues from Northern Virginia are not real happy with that because they've got people paying that kind of a toll on a daily basis.
They do, but their problem is different, and they have a variable toll, which is very different. We're talking about a set toll. Also, the technology has changed a lot since those were imposed in both Hampton Roads and Northern Virginia. And just as we tried to help them solve their problem, most of us in the corridor are asking them to help us solve our problem. It is a Commonwealth of Virginia, and we all have to try to help each other. And more importantly, 81 is the major roadway for the western part of the state and for economic development and growth for that part of the state as well.
We've expanded Medicaid, we've expanded access to health care, but costs keep rising. I know you're very interested in that issue.
They are, and that's a big concern. The forecasting is not working as we're currently doing it. The estimate was about $450 million that we're going to have to pay more in our current Medicaid program. And there's some concern, and we had grave concerns about the governor using general fund dollars for the expanded program when that was supposed to be paid for out of the provider tax that the hospitals were paying. So we're looking at that, and I think you'll see some action to try to rein in the cost related to Medicaid, our current program, and also look at that forecasting process so that we don't run into problems where we don't know where we're going and how much it's going to cost us. Medicaid is about 22 or 23% of the state budget.
That much?
It's the single largest portion of the budget now. And expansion will add to that, but it's supposed to be paid for, at least the state share, from the provider tax that was adopted in the budget, and hopefully in the future that will be the case.
Now, what about the graying of America, the graying of Virginia, and the kinds of healthcare issues that implicates? Most people don't have long-term healthcare insurance. The only way most people can get it is through Medicaid, and there probably will be a lot of dual eligible seniors in the state of Virginia who are going to wind up using that because of problems of Alzheimer's, dementia, very expensive care. Is anybody looking at that?
When we talk about the graying of Virginia, I'm one of those that is graying, and I'm part of the baby boom generation, and we are the reason for that problem at this point. Our parents had big families. There's nothing wrong with that. Our generation tends to have fewer, children. So the problem is there are more of us and there are more of them that are paying the taxes that cover the costs, especially for Medicare and Medicaid at the federal level. What we're going to have to do, and you're exactly right, one of the areas that we're seeing the largest increase in cost is the dual eligible individuals that qualify for Medicaid and Medicare. That is something the state's very concerned about. We've got to figure out ways to keep people in their homes as long as they can. It's better for them. It's more cost effective for services. But that takes a lot of work. I work for a senior care agency, Home Instead Senior Care, that's got franchises all over the state and the nation. And one of the things that we do is just try to work with people in their homes. We don't do health care, but just providing services in the home is going to be key. So we're looking for strategies on ways to do that and keeping people, one, out of the hospital when possible, and then two, out of assisted living or skilled nursing until they are absolutely at the point where they have to.
What kind of costs are we looking at in terms of an individual who needs to be institutionalized, for example, versus one you can take care of at home?
Well, if someone's in a nursing facility or assisted living, it's probably going to be double what it costs to keep them in their home. Now, one of the problems with in-home care, health care, or just personal care as we call it, is that the rates are so low that many people, many businesses and providers won't provide that assistance to Medicaid individuals. So that's another thing I know I've talked to Chairman Jones about and others. We've somehow got to get the rates up so that that can be competitive, because in the long term, again, that's still more cost effective. And most people, if you talk to them, Woody, if they can make their home work for them from the standpoint of grab bars and making sure they have ramps and the like, it's much better. They would rather stay in their home. I mean, most people would rather stay in their home than have to move out of their home. And then if they don't have that option, then we've got to make sure the assisted living facilities and the skilled nursing facilities are there. Right now, there's not a whole lot of capacity looking at the baby boom generation.
Now, you're Vice Chair of Appropriations, and that committee, along with rules dealing with the tax issues as a result of the tax cut last year. How are things working out with that so far?
Well, the House Finance Committee, luckily, and the House Rules Committee had those bills. We forwarded them to House Finance. We have two bills that are coming forward now. Delegate Hugo has the bill that will adjust the deductions, or allow the deductions for individuals so that they can bring that tax burden down that they're going to see from the federal action on the tax policy. And they'll also raise the deductions for individuals and families, which will help as well. So it'll equalize and not raise the tax on those 600 or 700,000 Virginians that are going to see that impact. At the same time, Chairman Jones has a bill that will conform us to the federal policy and also set aside those additional funds in a taxpayer relief fund that can't be used for any other purpose other than to give back to the taxpayers. Both are going on the same track now, so we're trying to make sure. We want to see Delegate Hugo's bill go forward, but if it doesn't, we've got Delegate Jones's bill as a backup, but more importantly, making sure we conform Virginia's tax law to the federal code.
Now, will that conformity allow Virginia residents to itemize deductions, or if they take the standard deduction at the federal level, will they be required to do the same at the state level?
Delegate Hugo's bill deals more with that. Delegate Jones is again our backup plan, if you will, depending on what the Senate decides to do, and negotiations where the governor decides he's willing to work with us.
Yeah, and that's on that earned income tax credit issue,
yes,
I take it.
It is.
Okay. Thank you, Delegate Steve Landis. Good luck the rest of the session.
Thank you, Woody. It's always good to be with you.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Comcast. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans. Mm-hmm.